forms of aggression that are operating under colonialism. So when I watched the film, a few things stood out for me. I was impressed by the way that Karmakate makes a commitment to listening to all things. And I think that's a very different position than he perceives in the Rubber Barons, whose violence is seen throughout the film. And even in the opening scene, you know, one of the questions that he's trying to resolve for himself, it seems to me, is whether or not to help Theo, right? And so his immediate way of being, it seems to me, is to offer help. And he wants to withhold help because he fears the violence, I think, that has come through the rubber plantations. So there's several moments, I think, where he sort of challenges what he calls the white view. For example, when he tosses the map away and says, "This world is vast and all you see is your map," right? Or that moment when Theo wants his compass back, right? And so it starts out as kind of a funny moment for the young men in the community. And, you know, very soon there's this aggression that Theo, who seems like a fairly mild-mannered man initially, expresses when his thing is not available to him. And part of what's going on there is he's saying, I'm afraid that other knowledges will be lost because this knowledge will take its place. So I think there's just many examples of this throughout the film. One of them is, you know, it's not just science that Karmakate says your science leads to death, right? But also the religion, right? And there's that amazing moment when the priest is beating the children and he says, you are perverting the innocence, right? Or that moment where Evan offers $2 American and says it's a lot of money, right? So as I watched this film, I felt like there was this conversation going on about what are the roles of aggression and what are the roles of connection that are being interrogated in this sort of long meditation, I think, on what it means to be a whole man. And as I was watching the film this afternoon, I was thinking, maybe what it means to be a whole man is to be held in community, and that is part of what's been challenged and harmed by the greed that's articulated in the navigation of the film. So those are just a few thoughts that came to me, and I'd be very interested to hear what the other panelists think.
Thank you, Mary. And if I can just interject something really quickly, just from Latin American eyes, this film, of course, it's kind of hard to watch in terms of how it reminds us of how every richness in the Americas has brought death and violence and destruction. And if you know the book, The Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano, he describes that moment in history when rubber started to be exploded in the most violent ways, murderous ways possible, and how every single richness that has been detected as a potential, something that is profitable has brought such a level of masculine violence, masculine white violence, and this is not something that has been interrupted in history, right? It's still happening, and that's why it's hard to watch. It's not like an account, a fictionalized account of the past. It's really much, it's very much describing something that it's ongoing and still happening, and it's very hard to watch.
Kia ora koutou, tēnā kōrua, ko Panikiri te maunga no Waikere Moana. My name is Simon Lambert. Panikiri is my mountain. My tribal territory is Waikere Moana, central Aotearoa, New Zealand, North Island. No, we don't feature in Lord of the Rings, so you've probably never seen it. And I wanted to come into the movie as an old writer I read many years ago, Quentin Crisp, famous for a book called The Naked Civil Servant, talked about going to the cinema as one goes to a religious experience. You're going into the dark, you're facing the same direction, you're surrendering yourself to an experience, a collective experience. It's very different from binge watching Game of Thrones on Netflix. Right? There is something quite spiritual about being in a dark space and watching anything, but particularly a movie like this. Three things I came in sensitised to. One was, and I've just mentioned it, the experience of cinema, and how cinema is still important, and watching things on the big screen are still important. It'd be different watching this on your phone. It'd still be similar, you know, it'd still be learning or experiencing some things, but not the experience of watching it in the dark, right, with people you don't necessarily know. Going to church, you're generally going in a congregation, so there's a little different there. The other thing was I was curious as to the role of the jungle. So my research background is Indigenous environmental management, and I was just curious as how the river was going to be, the jungle was going to be portrayed. And then of course the river is a character in its own, the parallels with the serpent and the anaconda towards the end with this vision from on high of this thing snaking through this seemingly impenetrable jungle, but it's penetrated. And then of course as soon as you mention rubber and the idea of and Germany, and so New Zealand and Canada and many other countries have a relationship with Germany over the last century. It's tetchy. It was a war of material. World War I, World War II were wars of what they call material. The more stuff you had, the more metal, the more oil, the more rubber, the more lives, you were going to win. Whoever had the most stuff was going to win. So finding rubber, oil, metal, lives was fundamental to that colonial experience. And it kind of still is. That hasn't changed. The most resilient thing out there is capitalism. Really, just keeps on trucking along. And also, I was sensitive to my current research, which is Indigenous disaster risk reduction. And there's a concept out there that the disaster's already happened. It's not just colonisation, it's climate change, disease, stuff has happened, and we're constantly in response and recovery modes as Indigenous communities, Latin American communities, and European communities as well. You've got to laugh at these men going into the jungle to find themselves. Because really, you could do that in your bathroom. You could look in the mirror and just think a little different. But there is something about leaving your home and the comfort of your home and going, you know, what's more exotic / discomforting for your average white European male, than a jungle. And they draw people in, they draw Europeans in for experiences. It's a multi-billion-dollar business now. I thought of William Burroughs' writings, going to search for Yage in the jungle, and I always read that as like, what's more ridiculous than this wealthy East Coast American guy stumbling through the jungle to get stoned? It was just like bizarre, but he's trying to find himself, and I don't know if he managed on that trip, but it's this constant search for experience that non-Indigenous communities are putting out there, and they keep looking at Indigenous communities to add something. I don't know if we've got it.
Yeah, good point. Now is ayahuasca in Peru that it's appealing to a lot of Westerners that are going to find these quests for finding themselves. Just one point that I thought was relevant to bring up because it's a university event and we're involved in the production of knowledge, and I think one of the points that is raised in the movie too is why do we want knowledge, right? And that's a question that is always been so central to me, as a social scientist, like, why do we want to know this? What is animating, what is driving us to produce a particular kind of knowledge, and what is that going to be used for? What kind of power relations are going to be created or disrupted? So, yeah, those are my thoughts.
I just want to respond to that because I actually also think when you think about rubber, you know, it's definitely significant to transportation, right? And I think one of the issues about knowledge is under the globalization of capital, distance has been used to obscure knowledge of the damage that's done in the production of these various kinds of commodities that clearly Karmakate is saying, you don't need that, right? He says, get rid of that stuff, right? Why are you so devoted to your things? So I just think that it's also profoundly ironic that there's this journey, right? People going, seeking knowledge of themselves and other cultures, but also that there's this speeding up of traveling across space and time with these transportation systems that are really what make globalization possible.
Should we open the